So that entire intro of the crash and the lighthouse and the coming down into Rapture, that's what they added to the 99%,
Wait.
and that's what made it work.
I actually am really attached to my personal interpretation of the very beginning of that game,
Yeah.
and the fact that it may be a frivolous addition really hurts my soul.
Well, I don't think... What's up? Welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name is Kaysen.
And this is our analysis of Bioshock. Bioshock. If you are new to our podcast, I say this at the beginning of each new series. This is primarily a storytelling analysis podcast. We mostly look at what we think are some of the greatest stories ever told in video games. Games or stories that we think rival or are in the same ballpark as the greatest works of literature and film and that sort of thing, and try to highlight those. So usually in our first episode, we will dive into development history, get to know the developers of the game, the creators behind it, and what some of their intentions were. Then we'll play the game, and each week do it in a little bit of a book club format where we play a certain section. The audience also does so, and comes back and we discuss what we played that week.
Yes, for that reason, we avoid late game spoilers until we reach that point in the game.
Correct. So, whether you have played the game before or not, you should be able to enjoy this without feeling like you're going to receive any spoilers. And specifically for this game, it's going to be really, really important that we do that. I'm going to try to be ultra careful in reading quotes and talking about dev history to not give away some of the bigger twists of the story, because they're very, very good, and I would not want to ruin that experience for anyone. So,
well, interesting. So I don't know the twists, but I might pick up on things as we go. So, my apologies.
Oh yeah, I guess we should probably mention that
wrong.
too. Usually in these podcasts, one or the other of us has not played the game before. Whether it's I've played it before and Kaysen hasn't, or whatever. We've only done one game before where neither of us had played it.
Yes.
I have played Bioshock. Kaysen has not played Bioshock.
I have not played it.
You can kind of watch someone's first reactions and guesses and things like that going through as well. That's another thing people tend to they tell us that they enjoy about the podcast. Good. So
I'm aware of the game. I watched my brother play it a little bit once, but I know very little about the ultimate story.
Okay, so
what I do know is that it's based, at least in part, on Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged.
Yes, we're going to talk about that quite a bit.
We are. In fact, I'm going to try to read that whole book this week, so we'll see what happens.
All right. So in order to talk about the developers behind this game, we have to talk a little bit about the studio Looking Glass. Ever heard of this studio?
Right. In the 90s.
Yeah, they were big in the 90s, and their big games, I would think the biggest ones that pertain to or relate to Bioshock in particular are System Shock.
System Shock.
And System Shock 2.
Yeah. And then Ken Levine worked on a game called Ninja. The Shadows.
Thief?
The Dark Thief. That's it, not Ninja.
The Thief series, yeah.
Thief, the Dark Project. Yeah, he worked on that one.
So, the experiences on developing Thief and System Shock in particular really kind of led into a lot of the gameplay ideas that went into Bioshock.
And System Shock's a little more RPG-ish, I think, right?
Yes, and but also kind of, I guess Bioshock kind of has a little bit of a horror vibe to it too.
Yes,
for sure. But System Shock, I think, a little more so.
Mostly, okay.
You can look at Bioshock as almost like a spiritual successor to the System Shock.
I had read
series.
that, and I was actually surprised to see that the spiritual successor to a thing became 100 times more popular than the thing itself. Like, wow, I don't know how often that happens.
Yeah.
Because I was looking this up just in preliminary research, and it's like Bioshock this game sold like 25 million units, just this one game.
Yeah, it was
or 20.
hugely
Anyways,
popular.
The whole series has sold closer to 40 million, which is like, I didn't know it was this popular. I didn't know we were dealing with like a game that was in line of basically like Mario or Pokemon. Like, this is incredibly high selling game.
Two things on that. First of all, one thing that I thought was really funny doing research into this was how many people were pointing to this game as being like the final proof. See, games can be art kind of a thing.
Okay.
I think part of that is what you're talking about. It was a mega seller like that, and not a lot of people have played something like Silent Hill 2 or you know what I mean? Xenogears. And so there are a lot of people in the mainstream, I feel like, critics and things like that, making these types of statements that I thought were absurd and hilarious because it's like you haven't played a lot of games if that's what you think. But it's interesting to me that this resonated with people on kind of that level. The other thing, though, was talking about spiritual successors being more successful than the original, or the spiritual successor, being more successful than the original game. I can think of at least a couple of examples. Dark Souls being a mega hit after Demon Souls.
Oh, you're right. You're right. Yeah, that's
and then like something like Xenoblade after Xenogears or Xenosaga.
True. That's true.
So it does happen from time to time.
You're right.
But,
you're right.
Anyway, Ken Levine, is kind of the brainchild behind Bioshock, and the lead developer on this game. So we're going to be talking about him a little bit, and some other developers. But there was a specific interview, and he was asked, "Is Bio a true sequel or prequel to System Shock 2, or is it a spiritual successor?" Ken Levine says Bioshock has absolutely no relation to the System Shock series in terms of intellectual property, character setting, etc. However, it is inspired by
I think legally he's got to say that,
of course. It is inspired by the open-ended design principles pioneered by Looking Glass. Irrational is dedicated to maintaining that tradition. So Irrational Games is the name of the division in 2K, which developed Bioshock, which was made up of many, many of the people who came from Looking Glass. So he says Bioshock is also being created by the majority of the team who created System Shock 2, and many of these games which helped inspire it. This group includes me, John Che, project lead, Steve Kimura, art, Mauricio Tejerina, who did art, Nate Wells, art, Ian Vogel, design, and Alex K, design. When Looking Glass went out of business, rest in peace, man, that place rocked and the world will never be, they never got the credit that they deserved. We were able to hire Eric Brosius, sound guru who created the sound for both System Shock 2 and the entire Thief series. So that, I guess someone who was contracted for those but wasn't a part of Looking Glass. Dorian Hart, who did design on Shock 2, Thief, and Terra Nova. And Sean Robertson, who did art. Darren Lafreniere, that looks like a French name to me, programming. And Sarah Virilli, design on Thief. So a lot of people who worked on either Thief, System Shock, Terra Nova, these were all Looking Glass games, kind of all came together within Irrational Games, which is a branch of 2K. I think it was 2K Boston for a while, but they ended up renaming it as Irrational at a certain point.
Yeah.
In fact, I believe Irrational Games, let me look at this real quick, because it says Looking Glass Studios was an American game developer based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was founded by Paul Neurath and Ned Lerner as Blue Sky Productions in 1990 and merged with Lerner Research in 1992, became Looking Glass Technologies. It eventually became Looking Glass Studios. Following financial issues at Looking Glass, the studio shut down in May of 2000. So this is when a lot of those guys moved over to 2K, because I think Ken Levine went to pitch Bioshock to a bunch of developers. And
something like that. And it was turned down initially because the game apparently Shock... What's it called?
System Shock?
System Shock. System Shock 2 didn't sell all that well. So when he shows up saying, hey, we got System Shock 3, they were like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks, right? Mm-hmm. But he was really passionate about it, so he kept working on it anyways. But he couldn't actually put very much money into it. Mm-hmm. Nobody would invest.
Yeah, so he tried to pitch it to Electronic Arts. As System Shock 3. Yeah. They rejected that idea because it didn't sell. System Shock never sold all that well. I think System Shock was a PC exclusive game.
Oh, really?
So that's probably a big part of the reason why. So they ended up making a bunch of games at Irrational in between System Shock 2 and Bioshock, some of which they used as like experience to learn like the first person shooter genre, to get like, really familiar and to make sure that they knew their genre they were going to make right before they actually decided to do Bioshock.
Yeah.
But the whole time it was something kind of in the back of Ken Levine's mind, something in the style of System Shock 2. That was really what he wanted to do. And they were kind of developing that even while they were making these other games, developing the ideas for it. And so the kind of core gameplay mechanic, and this is something he's talked about a lot too. And we've touched on this in previous podcasts. Do you go for a story first approach in design or a gameplay approach first in design?
Right.
Both,
or maps first,
or maps first if you're a Xenoblade developer, right? Yeah. Anyway, there's not really a right or wrong answer to which is correct. It's more just based on, what are you really trying to accomplish with your project. Yeah. Ken Levine is a gameplay first philosophy. Yeah. That's his philosophy in terms of development. He thinks you got to take care of your gameplay first, and then you build your story around that.
I am a little shocked to hear that.
Really?
Playing
Bioshock.
I picked it up. I played the first, hour or so of it. Like the gameplay is like interesting. I don't know, maybe it's just because it's from 2007, but in my opinion, the story far outweighs the gameplay, in my opinion. And maybe I'm just not a huge fan of first persons, though, really.
I'm not either.
Okay.
Which is why I'm kind of so excited about this one, because despite the fact that I'm not a big first-person shooter fan, this game is still considered like one of the best games ever made. I mean, I think its aggregate scores are like upper 90s across the board, almost no matter where you go. It's like a 96 out of 100, almost, which is pretty good. I mean, that's one of the most highly rated games of all time.
I'm not saying it's bad.
Yeah,
but the story seems to me to clearly be the focus, or maybe the reason why this game is so popular. I could be wrong about that. Maybe it was just the gameplay and people loved it.
No, I agree with you. Okay. It is a shock to kind of hear that, because I think the story is what really stuck with people. People don't, when they talk about Bioshock, they're not talking about
the gameplay.
They're not talking about the gameplay mechanics. They're talking about the story. And I was also shocked to learn how many iterations of the story this went through in development.
Yeah, me too. It was a quite different game, even just like a year before.
Yeah.
It went through a ton of changes.
A ton of changes.
And it was like 5-year development, I think, from 2002 to 2007.
And so they kind of came up with this gameplay mechanic first, which was this idea of 3 groups of forces.
That's genius. Rock, paper, scissors almost.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
Yeah, so you've got you've got like a resource, like a drone that gets resources. Then you've got the protector that protects the drone. But then you've got the extractor. What would be the word
harvester?
For that? A harvester that comes and takes the resources from the drone while the protector is trying to protect the drone.
Yeah.
So, and those 3, you've got something of like a rock, paper, scissors kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
And that's genius. That's really smart. And to have the whole game like take place around those 3 things, I wonder if playing the game, it's not even really that apparent that that's what they're doing in the game.
Right.
But it's cool that that's the core of the whole like philosophy for development. Because as I'm playing the beginning of it, it's just like, you're killing stuff, you're playing a game, right? Things are trying to kill you and you're defending yourself. I don't see so much of the element of those 3, but I have approached something along the lines of a little sister, big daddy. I have approached the trio. And I am seeing how they are kind of at the core of all of this.
Right.
Because the drones have something that everybody wants.
Yes,
right. And it's like, I'm slowly seeing how it works. But it's so funny because I wouldn't have guessed that was the core behind the gameplay. I would have guessed something else.
Yeah.
I love this, though. It's so good.
It's really interesting because if you have that as your starting point, this is what the game is. It's this, like you're talking about, it's these 3 sort of factions kind of fighting over resources. That's like the core of what this gameplay experience is.
Sure.
Now, what story do we write around that? I mean, that's that's a Pandora's box almost. There's so many directions you could take that, right? And that's kind of what they did. I probably about like 3 years ago, maybe 2019, 2018, I for a very brief period of time was considering coming on board to write the story for an indie game with some indie developers.
Oh, yeah.
I was involved in probably the first month or two of like really early stage planning for this. And I've said it many times in the past that if I were making my own game, I would take the story first approach where I write a story I want to tell and then I build gameplay systems that support that story. Right. That's just my personal philosophy. That's how I would do it. But for this game in particular, they'd already done a lot of programming and they'd already kind of come up with like, some mechanics and things that they wanted to use. And so, I was trying to really ask them, okay, like I felt it would be better in that case since they had already done a lot of work. We should develop a story around some of these things you guys have already made. What do you think about if we add this mechanic to it? Is that something you think you could do? Because like then the gameplay experience would more or less be this. It would be it kind of ended up being like a survival, like an outdoor survival kind of thing with some horror elements. And a first-person perspective. Okay, now I can start thinking of some stories that would like maybe support that gameplay loop. And so they had a lot of different directions they could take this. So one of the first ideas that they had, right, was this idea of a cult deprogrammer. So
yes, I read this line.
Yeah.
This was kind of kind of creepy, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is very good.
So this is apparently something you can hire somebody in real life to do this.
Yeah.
Somebody who would go and like basically kidnap somebody who's like in a cult and bring them out and deprogram them from the cult and like reintegrate them into society. But there's some kind of dark places you can take this as well, which is kind of where they were hinting at going with this, was a senator or some kind of political figure who wants to deprogram, as an example. This wasn't something, I want to make sure this is really clear. This was not in the concept that they wrote, but it was an example that Ken Levine was sharing as an example of something that could have gone into the gameplay concept they had come up with. Yeah. Perhaps some senator who's, I don't know, say like a far right-leaning politician wants to deprogram their lesbian daughter or something like that, right? You're trying to like take somebody who is making these choices with their lives or feels this way, and then because of my the people I'm appealing to in politics, I'm going to reprogram, take that will away from them. Because that's another big thing in this game is the idea of will, like free will.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Oh, yes.
So that was kind of an early concept, and they sort of came to agree relatively early on into that concept. This isn't exactly where we want to go with this. This is probably a little too controversial
it was too on the nose.
Political. Yeah. Maybe we should change this. So then it becomes like a World War II, like a post-World War II thing with like experiments happening in an underground lab and like, again, a very different concept from what Bioshock eventually became. It took another almost full going back to the drawing board story-wise before they arrived at the idea of Rapture and an underwater city and making the little sisters as the drones, the big daddies as the protectors, and the splicers as the harvesters. Right? But the three faction core gameplay is still there. It was there from the beginning. That was always what they wanted to do with it. But it took 3 iterations of story to arrive at one that they felt they could all kind of get on board with, right?
Yeah.
So really, really interesting history of how that kind of came around. And it took many years for them to kind of come to that. So let me pull up some quotes about this.
While you're doing that, I did want to bring up something real quick. So the System Shock franchise has been sold and has kind of exchanged hands a few times, and there were different developers who were looking to do something with System Shock, especially since Bioshock was so successful. But it has wound up, it's in China now. So a company called Tencent, which is one of the biggest companies in China, they currently own the rights for System Shock for the whole franchise. And I don't know exactly what they're going to do with it, but that's where it is right now.
Yeah. Talking about how early pitches set the core game system against the backdrop of an abandoned Nazi genetics lab or a sci-fi environment.
That got unearthed later.
Yeah, they weren't exciting enough to grab publishers' attention. Codemasters passed on it, as did Atari and EA. Even when 2K, part of Take-Two, signed the project in 2004, the game was a shadow of what it would eventually become. So here's a Ken Levine quote. It was not Rapture. Andrew Ryan didn't exist. The Big Daddies and Little Sisters, as you know them, didn't exist. It was just this idea about game systems. Take-Two bought it on that basis, on the basis of the 3-faction gameplay system, not on the story.
Wow.
I'm not exactly sure why they did that at the time. I think it showed a lot of vision on their part. So clearly they were just impressed with the developer's background working on System Shock and weren't so worried about what the story would be, but the gameplay itself. That sounds like something that would sell. So we'll go with that kind of thing, right? So it took a long time for them to get to this, but it wasn't until Ken Levine started thinking about objectivism and was, reading Ayn Rand a little bit that he sort of began to fall on okay, we know what this story is going to be now. Yeah. So, again, I really don't want to spoil anything in terms of the twists and turns and the incredible, impactful, huge moments that come later in this game. Okay. So I'm going to really dance around that. But I do think it's important, and this is kind of really the real purpose of our podcast, right? It's not... When we talk about it's a storytelling podcast, we're not talking about let's regurgitate and summarize every detail perfectly and talk about all the lore surrounding it and just be it's not a lore podcast. This is a storytelling technique.
Right. It's like we're analyzing the art.
Yes.
Within the game, not necessarily the who said what's and the internal lore.
Yes. And the thematic core is what we're really trying to dive at here. So I think when you're playing this, it's important to kind of know what they were going for there. So, and one other thing, we have to say this a lot too, just because we're going to bring up certain philosophers or people and their ideas as we talk through the podcast does not mean we necessarily espouse the same ideas. Right. A lot of times we'll discuss it in a way in which we're having a discourse about it and we're trying to explore that idea to its conclusions and kind of so it may seem sometimes like, oh, are these guys, no, we're just trying to talk about it as freely as possible. So Ayn Rand is an incredibly controversial person, writer, thinker, and no, we do not agree with everything Ayn Rand says there, and neither is Ken Levine. That's kind of the main point here.
Right.
But a lot of those ideas are going to show up, and so we're going to talk about them, and we're going to suggest you read Ayn Rand in order to really get a full understanding of what this game's going for in terms of its exploration of objectivism, which was a huge philosophy of Ayn Rand's.
In fact, that's something maybe we could explain real quick.
Sure.
So objectivism is basically the idea. It eliminates any type of outside forces that act on humans. Basically, it's saying objectivism says that there isn't a God, and that there isn't that the best way to get the most abundant life, the most abundant amount of resources is through a system that incentivizes greed, basically. So it does take into account human motivation, which is something that most ideological systems don't do. Most ideological systems say, hey, here's a great system, isn't it great? And then you say, yeah, but you're putting people who are not great into your great system, and they're going to break it and destroy the whole thing.
An ideal that might not necessarily account for human failings and flaws, and how would that really work out in real life. Yeah.
Now, so what Ayn Rand does with objectivism takes it's capitalism. It's very hardcore, laissez-faire, intense, libertarian, more or less anarchist, really, capitalism. which is just, whoever is like a meritocracy. Like if you're good at something, then you get money for the thing that you do.
Completely unregulated.
Unregulation, none of that stuff. That people will regulate themselves because the greed would lead towards them providing a service or product that didn't have issues, right? And you'll always get people taking advantage of that. And then, and then the absence of God is actually really important. It's not just that Ayn Rand was an atheist. It's that she does not like the idea of an external force like judging or of you doing anything that's outside of your own will. Whatever you want to do, and find a way to make it happen. It's sort of Nietzschean. It's like a will to power kind of thing. It's like, don't worry about somebody else who's telling you that you can't do something or that you shouldn't. That might be the word, that you shouldn't do something, like the superego, right? Yeah. Just do what you want as best as you can, and the greed will lead you to do it in a way that other people will support, as opposed to just, something like that. I'm trying to think of what else. All of you Ayn Rand people are probably going to tear me apart for this. It's capitalism, atheism, and greed being the primary motivator. Those are the three. And the more I talk, the more I show that maybe I'm not an Ayn Rand person who knows her philosophy inside and out. But that's it. Those are the three.
It's more about the general idea. We'll get into more of the details, when they're necessary. But I think it's also important to point out maybe why.
Absence of government, by the way.
Yeah, absence of government.
That would be a fourth one. No government, please.
Yeah.
So no government, greed, no God, and the last one is capitalism.
Yeah. It's also maybe important to understand a little bit of why she might have developed some of these things.
Yes, that's good.
Being a Jew who was, a lot of Jews during that time period, of course, they lost their homes. They were displaced.
Yeah.
This is World War II time. Obviously the Holocaust is happening.
Yeah.
So there's certainly like a cultural sort of fear. Maybe not fear is the right word, but a consciousness, I guess.
Like an anxiety. Yeah.
An anxiety about displacement, about like finding a home, about not feeling like you belong in the place that you're at. This isn't really my culture. This isn't really my home. We need to find a place that's ours.
Yeah.
That sort of developed from that. And you can kind of see how fleeing from oppressive governments.
Forces. Which she was in the Soviet Union. That's worth bringing up as well. She was under a horrible, oppressive, like communist regime that was just awful. And of course, her reaction to that is 180, complete opposite of that.
The opposite
total,
extreme.
Zero authority.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's important to bring up is that this game is not really setting out to be like a flat refutation of objectivism or Ayn Rand necessarily. And I actually like that it's not that, because it's not preachy in that sense, right? What it's more doing is showing how ideological extremes tend to be idealistic in a way that does not account for human failing.
Sure.
That does not account for the fact that when the rubber meets the road and this idea has to meet reality and it has to deal with real humans trying to live within those ideologies and those ideals, it tends to not go the way you think it's going to go as an extreme thinker who has kind of an extremist view.
Right.
Right? That's really more, I think, what Ken Levine is doing with this.
Sure.
Right?
That makes sense. And by the way, any of you, because I know there's a lot of, there are a lot of people who are very sympathetic to Ayn Rand and like her a lot. I have, I am aware of a lot of people like that. So please comment, and because I know I'm sure that we both just butchered her philosophy and that you could do a better job. We're open to that. We aren't like prejudging. Well, we are a little bit, but we aren't intending to completely dismiss her completely. I would love to, read some opinions in the comments and people saying, hey, it might be worth it to bring this up because this would help make her philosophy seem a little bit different. That's fine. I'm totally open to that. I have not yet read Atlas Shrugged. I will be doing so in the next week or two, and then I will hopefully have a better idea of her opinions on everything.
Well, and I think it's important to add to that and sort of reiterate from past podcasts that that is the entire purpose of discourse. Right, is allowing, and that's the reason why we kind of structure this the way we do, where we leave the comments open, we try to read them, where people come in and will add things that we don't know about. We don't claim by any means to be experts on all these topics we talk about and we encounter in these games. We can't be, right? We try to do as much research as we can. We try to become more knowledgeable about it. We're trying to expand our own understanding of a wide array of philosophies and new science that we might not be aware of. But we're not experts in any of it. I didn't, study this stuff for years and years and years in college and become a political scientist or anything like that. So we're going to be enlightened just as much from the comments and the audience. This is why this is a book club format.
Right.
We're not teaching you. We're starting a conversation, and a lot of things we're going to learn from what you guys have to offer. And I have always believed it's important to wrestle with ideologies you don't agree with.
Oh yeah.
I think it's very important to with an open mind and to not be disingenuous in like seriously considering and steel manning people who you might think of as your political enemy or on the opposite political spectrum from you, because you will in the process of that discourse find the places in which your own thoughts and feelings and beliefs do have holes in them, and you can work to address those things and readjust. And so, I feel like it's really important to do that. It's really important to reconsider your beliefs. Always do that, and we don't have to accept the parts of this that we know are flawed. This philosophy, we can, find the pieces that maybe do make sense and throw out the ones that don't. And everyone is encouraged to do that, of course. So,
I'm mostly just saying, don't kill us or anything, because we're going to learn, and we will have our viewpoints will likely evolve throughout the course of the podcast. I also want to bring up, in addition to Ayn Rand, there's also George Orwell, Aldous Huxley, John D. Rockefeller, and Walt Disney, who, among possibly others, but these are the primary people who are being explored. Their ideas, their philosophies are being explored within this. The biggest difference is with Orwell and Huxley. I mean, Rockefeller, it's kind of just the story of his own life, I guess. With Walt Disney, I don't know. He explored these things to an extent, but Ayn Rand was the utopian version.
Yes.
Whereas Orwell and Huxley were the dystopian, right?
Yes.
And in some ways, it's easier to write a dystopia. It's easier to envision a dystopia. So, kudos to Ayn Rand for trying to be utopian, but at the same time, utopias don't exist.
I don't think
and
they
so
exist.
You've got, of course, she's the one that you're going to pick on and say, here's where you're wrong. See, George Orwell got it right. Huxley got it right. But that's because Huxley and Orwell were being pessimistic.
Yes, right.
and anyways, to that extent, there's going to be some of that there.
Yeah, and that a lot of the ideas embodied in these people you're talking about, they're kind of embodied in a specific character. I'm not going to mention anybody because I'm really trying to be careful about spoilers this time. But they're embodied in a character specifically. I think you'll find that very soon as you begin playing. And again, I don't think we're meant to come out of this purely condemning this character we're talking about. I think that you're meant to kind of see that even ideologues, right, are human, and that there might be good intention. There often is good intention behind it, but good intention can only take you so far when you have to meet reality. So that, I think, is a pretty good way of summarizing some of the thematic core of what Bioshock is really going after. And if you're thinking about these things, make sure, because another thing is this game's story is delivered in more than just cutscenes and dialogue. You've got to find a lot of sort of like tapes with extra bits of this kind of thing.
Okay.
From characters in the world and things like that. There's little audio recordings that you'll need to listen to. Make sure you're looking for those. Make sure you listen to them and pay attention to them.
Oh, good.
Because they're really important.
Good.
Don't miss them. Don't try to go to the next area too quickly. Make sure you've really explored and you've really tried to find as many of those as you can, because they're very, very important for this game. so I just wanted to read this real quick. The thematic core of Bioshock was born when Levine was walking at Rockefeller Center near the GE building in New York City. He saw the uniqueness of the Art Deco styling of the building, along with the imagery around the building, such as the statue of Atlas near it. Keep that in mind, too,
well,
specifically
Atlas Shrugged
Atlas.
is a reference to,
Yep.
the Titan Atlas in Greek mythology.
Yeah.
I suspect we'll be talking about that later.
Absolutely. There's definitely a character we'll be talking about as well in regards to that. And recognized that these were spaces that had not been experienced in the first-person shooter genre. So he liked the aesthetic of that kind of architecture and art.
Art Deco's like 20s, 30s, 40s.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
Right.
A lot of New York, old New York, it looks like that.
Right. And so the aesthetic of Rapture, this city under the water, really embodies that kind of style to it, and which makes it really unique. Bioshock really unique aesthetically from kind of any other first-person shooter. That's what he was really looking for, was like, what can we make that's going to stand out, right? The history of the Rockefeller Center also fed into the story concept. Levine noted how the center had started construction prior to the Great Depression, when the primary financiers had pulled out. John D. Rockefeller Jr. backed the remaining construction to complete the project himself. As stated by Edge magazine, a great man building an architectural triumph against all odds. Okay, so this underwater city, you'd think that's impossible to build a city on the on the ocean bed, you know what I mean? But kind of, and again, this game takes place in a similar time period, so it's like, I'm really trying to be careful not to give too much away, but these are some of the things that inspired the city itself, the person who built the city, the ideology of the person who built the city, and all of that. So, let's see. Let me do a switch there as I look for the next point I want to talk about. I'm going to hold that off for when we're actually playing the game.
There's one other note I want to bring up here.
Okay.
So Bill Gardiner, who is he's like the chief level designer for the game, took a lot of inspiration from Resident Evil when making Bioshock, and in particular Resident Evil 4, which had come out pretty recently, just before Bioshock came out. But they loved the pacing, they loved the feel of the game and how scary, especially at the beginning parts. So the game designer took a lot of inspiration from Resident Evil.
Yes. I actually think I have. This comes from, I want to get his name right, Bill Gardner. He was a developer on the game.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking, the team on Bioshock was way outside our weight class. I don't remember the exact number, but we had about 50 people in-house working on that game, plus some outside help from Australia. That's compared to a game like Assassin's Creed, which came out at a similar time, which had maybe 300 people working on it.
Sure.
For the longest time, one of our core goals was to find that balance between System Shock and finding a way to balance our audience. Because System Shock, like I was saying earlier, was a little bit more of a horror, like a straight horror kind of setting. Given that we were bringing it to consoles, there were a lot of challenges there. Let's see. So they turned to Resident Evil 4 specifically because it was a horror game that had tremendous success on consoles. There's all these nods and all these little elements that I think you can see where Resident Evil inspired us to take the general complexity and amp it up. In a nutshell, Resident Evil may very much give me the confidence to say players can handle it. In fact, they're hungry for it. This type of experience, right? Because I think horror games maybe had been considered more of a niche, not like a mega seller type of genre, right? But Resident Evil 4 kind of proved that wrong. They really want to get more out of their environments, out of the combat, and out of the tools. And he speaks specifically about they were super inspired by the open-ended nature of the way they designed maps. Because like when you think of the very first little village square in Resident Evil 4, right? Where he kind of gets ambushed by all those people. There's so many ways to approach like surviving that. There's so many tools. You can go in houses, you can avoid that. You can pick up tools around the environment. You can run around and just sort of avoid people. There's so many ways to do it. And depending on how you choose to do that, it kind of changes what happens. Because, like, if you go into the house and try to get the shotgun in there, then you're going to bring out chainsaw guys, which are some of the toughest enemies in the game. I mean, they get up to you, it's like a one-hit kill kind of thing.
Right, I remember that.
So
they're the scariest.
Yeah, so like things change depending on how the player approaches the fight. And that was a big inspiration for them in how they designed Bioshock's environments and approach to combat and everything like that. Goes on to say, at the time, there was a lot of question regarding what people would tolerate in terms of complexity. Because they're doing a first-person shooter, a lot of first-person shooters at the time were, even if they weren't on rails, they might as well have been. Very linear.
Yeah.
You just go here, they pop out guys, you shoot the guys, you go to the next point, they pop out, you just shoot a bunch of guys, right?
Yeah.
We were positioning ourselves as a shooter, and there's a real pitfall there if you're a shooter and you don't scratch the right itch in terms of what the expectations are for a shooter. Resident Evil was a survival horror game, but they eventually added in all these combat elements, these tactical elements that made you decide, am I going to jump out this window or go out this door? Am I going to take out, or what tools am I going to use? It had this interesting design and tactical elements that I would show the team all the time. And I think that was really what was a big seller of Resident Evil 4 for me in particular. Like, I liked Resident Evil 1 okay. I had dabbled with it, but I hadn't really ever loved that series prior to that Resident Evil 4.
Not me neither. 4 was just a revelation, though. It was so cool.
And I think reading this is what made me realize, I think this was what it was. It was like that tactical element to it. Like, the other games had more of like the survival aspect where like you had only a certain number of cartridges you could use for saving in typewriters. And if you ran out, you couldn't save the game anymore. What I mean?
That's crazy.
Very limited ammo. And certainly there's an argument to be made for people who loved that series early on that was lost in Resident Evil 4. But what you gained in Resident Evil 4 was this. There was a lot of choices as to how you approached fighting and surviving your way through this nightmare village of mind-controlled people. And that was kind of like a huge driving inspiration for how they approached designing Bioshock as well. And, of course, like the horror vibes that you'll get from Bioshock, I'm sure some of that was there, too. Kind of going back to the objectivism thing. I think we covered that pretty well in terms of what we wanted to add to that, but I do want to read Ken Levine's quotes about it. So in this interview, this was with, looks like Shack News. They asked him, do you think you gave up objectivism a short... Hold on. Do you think you gave objectivism short shrift at all? I'm not an objectivist. I'm just curious as to how you respond to that. Ken Levine said, I'm fascinated by objectivism. I think the problem with any philosophy is that it's up to people to carry it out. It could have been objectivism. It could have been anything. It's about what happens when ideals meet reality. If you had to sum up Bioshock's story, that's what it is. So I wanted to just really punctuate what we were saying with that quote from the horse's mouth, I guess.
Yeah.
That's at the core of the theme of Bioshock. He says, when philosophers write books, when they write fictional works like Atlas Shrugged, they put paragons in the books to carry out their ideals. I think this is very true.
Yeah, well, in some ways, Ayn Rand's idea is that greed is a better way to act than virtue. Yeah. Or than altruism. Yeah. So it's because altruism, you just can't trust that people are always going to act altruistic. Yeah. But you can always trust that people will do what's in their personal self-interest. Right. And so through that, but then in illustrating that, she then maybe picks altruistic people. I don't know. We'll find out. We'll find out when we read the book.
Yeah. So I always wanted to tell a story, put paragons in the books to carry out their ideals. I always wanted to tell a story of what if a guy wasn't a paragon? What if his intentions were really good, but at the end of the day, he was human? I think that's where the problem is. It's not an attack on objectivism. It's a fair look at humanity. We screw things up. We're very, very fallible. You have this beautiful, beautiful city, and then what happens when reality meets the ideals? the visual look of the city is the ideals, and the water coming is reality. So, I really like that line beautiful. Quite a lot because architecturally, Rapture is really quite astoundingly beautiful.
It's something else. Yeah, it's cool.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
And it's buried in water. And that represents the reality of the fact that the ideals cannot be met because fallible non-paragons tried to carry it out.
I can almost see a parallel there in the fact that this city is mostly underwater. And it's like, theoretically, you can build a city underwater.
Yeah.
But realistically, eventually, the water's going to get in, right?
At some point, right?
At some point, the water will get in.
If you don't keep fixing it forever, I mean, there's going to be a leak somewhere.
It's like there's it's just the ultimate hubris. I remember in our Final Fantasy X podcast, I talked about how possibly not smart it is to build your city over a river or over a lake because it's gonna fall into the water.
Yeah.
Well, how much worse of an idea is it to build a city underwater, already underwater?
Yeah.
Right. And it's like you're asking for it. It's the ultimate act in hubris almost.
Yes.
And it's like, idealistically you could do it, but realistically the water's going to get into your city and you're all going to get flooded out.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
100%.
And once again, like we're discussing his opinion of Ayn Rand. I don't know. I almost am more interested in Ken Levine's idea of Ayn Rand than specifically Ayn Rand itself, at least for the purposes of what we're doing here.
Sure.
Right? At least his take is that, there's all these problems and he's illustrating them. And like, great, now it's time for the Randian people to refute that with their own fiction, like, great. Yeah. And this is kind of how a dialogue works. He's presenting one side of it.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing I kind of want to bring up too, because we started to touch on this, talking about Ayn Rand's Jewish background.
Oh, yeah.
Ken Levine also comes from a Jewish background.
Oh, okay.
He considers himself culturally Jewish, not religiously so.
Not religious.
But he grew up in New York, around a lot of Orthodox Jews in a culturally Jewish area. And he admits that this is something that maybe wasn't intentional, but maybe subconsciously kind of made its way into the game. It's something he admits to after the fact, not something he was like really thinking about while making the game. But kind of some of those ideas I was talking about, that sort of like anxiety about displacement, not feeling like you have a home, worrying about what happened in history. Could that repeat? Could it happen again? So in some ways, he's very sympathetic to Ayn Rand and to her opinion. Because in Atlas Shrugged, there is a place called Galt's Gulch that John Galt, it's his escape. He's escaping from government. He's founding his own little utopia out in, separate, away from government regulations and stuff. And that's very similar. That's basically what Rapture is in Ken Levine's work, is like it's more or less Galt's Gulch. Right. I mean, and you'll see this in a lot of the names of characters. They have very kind of traditionally Jewish names. Oh, really? Okay. And so look for that too. One thing, if you haven't seen our podcast before, Kaysen has done a lot of reading and a lot of research into symbolism, and so I'm really interested to see this game is going to be crazy, man. Yeah. I can already tell. I'm an hour in, and I've just got pages of notes. I'm like, it's everywhere. You're seeing like posters and like ads and just the names of things and statues, and it's all so meaningful. Yeah. And so I think it's important to kind of have this context, some of the Jewish cultural context, to look for that, and you can kind of see what you can pull from that too. Good. Another thing that I thought was really interesting about this game, and this seems to be true about a lot of things that kind of end up being lightning in a bottle type experiences, where it's just like a lot of things go wrong. Almost everything seems to go wrong, or it seems to indicate it's not going to be a success, yet it's a success anyways. All the experts seem to think, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to be good. And that happens a lot. And then it just culturally explodes. Yeah. Did you know the Beatles, when it was some of the first people to hear the Beatles perform initially before they had signed on any records, and they said, this music's a fad, it's on its way out. Like guitars and stuff. Like, no, that's not going to do it. And it's like, there's a quote, I think it was at Time. It was either Time or the New York Times, one of the two, that ran an article in October or November of 1903 saying that man would not achieve flight for centuries. And 1 month later, the Wright brothers achieved flight for the first time. Like, that this happens all the time, where all the experts agree and then they're all wrong. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. And so they went through these. The development was just very much not smooth.
Yeah.
People disagreeing within the team. I know that this is probably true of a lot of people who are maybe a little bit more in the know about Ken Levine and like just development history of games and do a little bit more study on developers themselves. He's a little bit controversial in terms of the crunch he puts his teams through or has done in the past. Yeah. Not making a working environment that's really conducive to the mental health of the people.
A lot of his employees didn't seem too excited to work with him again.
Yeah.
After that.
Right.
And because it's in part like, you go through a crunch time at the end, when you're getting your game ready for launch. But he was able to convince the publisher to delay the game, to give them a few more months to keep working. Yeah. And that you would think that, okay, guys, we got time. We can do this now. Let's not, slave away. Let's not kill ourselves trying to get the deadline. Instead, Ken Levine said, oh, sweet. Instead of 3 months slaving away and working to death, you now have 6 months to slave away and work to death. He didn't lighten up at all.
Not at all.
Even with the extra time. And even after the game came out, he said, I would have liked another 6 months to really polish the game.
It needed another 6 months, I think, to really be perfect.
And I just oh my gosh, man. I mean, I get it, but at the same time, the game wouldn't be what it is without him, without his vision, without his, direction. And so, I don't know. I get not wanting to work for him anymore, but at the same time, you want to work for somebody that's making waves, and Ken Levine made waves.
Oh, certainly. And I mean, they were told multiple times, whether it's by playtesters, by internal people in 2K. I think he was approached by somebody who put his hand on his shoulder and basically just told him this game's going to be a failure. Sorry to break it to you, man, but this isn't going to work.
I wonder who that guy was.
In fact, I think I want to find that quote exactly and read that because I thought it was really great.
That is great, man.
On one of the interviews on Bioshock, the collection, you described watching a focus group play the first game without understanding it or even liking it. He said, the focus group test guy sort of patted me on the back and said, sorry, this game is going to be a failure. That was one of those moments where you either accept the fact that somebody tells you you're a loser or you double down and say the fight's not over yet.
Though, I had heard that in testing, this game did not test well.
No.
That people really didn't like it when they first played it. And that was before they made some changes after that. But I really wonder what game did those people play?
Well, he goes on to say, this is really interesting. He said, before that focus test, did you regard the game as finished? He says, it was essentially done. We thought it was good. We thought it was cool. We thought it was Bioshock. 99% of what you see was already there in this playtest.
So what few things did they tweak?
This is fascinating. We came in on a Saturday. It was a Friday night, the focus test. There were 8 of us sitting around a table. We're all miserable. We're like, well, what do we do? What do we think is missing? Because we can't make something new. What is already there that they're not connecting to. We decided it was who they were, what their identity was, connecting with the character. The main protagonist.
Sure,
right?
but it's POV. It's first person.
Right. We came up with a very cheap way to add the opening scene, and I'm going to say this because it's just the very opening scene, so it's not really spoilers. With the plane crash, so that wasn't there in the original sort of
really?
testing. They added that opening with the plane crash.
Wait,
I wrote one line. We had this idea that you'd be smoking a cigarette on a plane, which set the time period really well. Because, of course, today you can't smoke on planes or any public space like that. And that time period you could. We wanted something right away that would not just say it with text, but would put it in your soul. So that entire intro of the crash and the lighthouse and the coming down into Rapture, that's what they added to the 99%, and that's what made it work. Which is crazy because this is one of the best intros in the history of video games.
But here's okay. So this is crazy because the way that you read that makes it sound like the intro is more or less disconnected from all the rest of the game. But it feels so integrated. It feels so almost at the core of what they were doing. So I think what they did is they took a thematic idea. They took a core of their work and extracted out the idea of the prequel of this plane crash happening from what they had already had going on. Because I actually am really attached to my personal interpretation of the very beginning of that game,
Yeah.
and the fact that it may be a frivolous edition really hurts my soul.
Well, I don't think it is frivolous, though. I think he's saying that it was everything. It's small in the scale of like what was left to do,
but it connects. It connects things.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Exactly
because
right.
if it was frivolous, then that means my interpretation is certainly wrong.
No, I don't think it is.
Okay, good.
I think what he's saying is that we had to find a way to get people to connect to this great game that we knew was there, and they weren't doing it. So this intro was what got it there. It's what connected people to the character, to the city, in a way that made them invested in it. Without that intro, they weren't getting there.
Okay.
And so the intro was everything.
Well, I'm excited to talk about what the intro is, because the intro is everything.
Yeah.
And that is so shocking to hear that was almost an afterthought. I just can't even, because that is what makes it.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, we've talked about a lot of intros in the games we've covered, and how important,
the most important part.
How important the hook is to the story.
And that's why there's always so much symbolism in an intro, because you really have to like pack so much meaning there as people are going through, and like it's almost like when you're writing a book. Mm-hmm. Chapter 1, page 1, paragraph 1.
The first sentence.
The very beginning is so important. It sets the tone for everything after it.
They talk about this all the time to authors writing books. Your first chapter, your first paragraph, your first sentence needs to hook the reader. The very first sentence they read, they have to go, oh my goodness, that's crazy. What happens next?
Why, yes.
Because if you don't hook them right away, it doesn't matter how good it gets.
Yes.
Right?
In chapter 20. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
You've got to hook them right away and set up the promise. Your intro is your promise to what they can expect if they stick with it, if they give you a chance.
It's almost like it doesn't actually matter what you do with the other 19 chapters of your book. If chapter 1 is really well crafted, people will read the whole book.
Yeah.
And they will probably love it.
Yeah. And that was essentially what they were missing. They were missing a good hook.
A good
at the beginning,
chapter 1.
that really got their audience invested in what's happening. And the rest of it was great. The rest of it was great. We're starting to run a little bit low on time for this week, so there's just kind of one more thing that I wanted to read, and then we'll kind of wrap up at that point.
The one thing I would bring up here at this point is that they made the whole game on Unreal Engine 2, using features from Unreal Engine 3, so they call it Unreal 2.5.
Yeah.
So this game was made on a later version of Unreal Engine 2.
Yeah. I want to kind of lead into just kind of the last point I'm going to make about how this convinced so many people, apparently, that games could be art.
No, good.
You got like Rolling Stone and not like necessarily traditionally game-centered sort of critics and outlets saying this kind of thing about Bioshock. Question here was, have you played Bioshock since then? He says, I played Burial at Sea, the DLC for Infinite, right, the other day, mostly to see what it looked like on my new 4K television. I don't really enjoy playing my own games. If I could still get paid, I would make games and never ship them. I don't enjoy shipping games. I think it's kind of dreadful.
That is stressful.
Yeah. He says, why? He says, you're exposing yourself in a very real way. You're saying, this is what I worked on. Now go make a judgment about me and my work. That's not always fun. The real warm experience is being with the team making it. And then the question, if you were still making Bioshock and you hadn't shipped it, what would you be working on? He says, I wouldn't work on it forever. I would have finished it and then put it in a box. Bioshock probably could have used another 6 months to a year to make it perfect. But eventually you have to stop. The gunplay was good, but not great. We didn't have a ton of experience with that.
Right.
And the ending lagged a little bit. And then they talk about Final Boss, which I won't discuss right now.
Okay.
Another criticism of Bioshock was that when you choose to save or to... Okay, never mind. I won't go over that part. It was just that part I wanted to say. He's even admitting here the gameplay, even though the gameplay was kind of the primary focus, that core gameplay, was not really... And I think you're already mentioning this in your first exposure to it. It's not like the greatest first-person shooter of all time.
Not really, no.
No, that's not really what makes Bioshock great.
It's interesting.
The fact that this was the game that seemed to convince so many people that games could be art is the part that's interesting.
Yeah.
And I kind of have to laugh at that because we've already discussed so many games on our podcast that came before Bioshock that were doing just as many interesting things thematically and from an artistic perspective, both in the gameplay and storytelling department, and just the art department, I guess, visual. But it's as much as it kind of like irks me to hear somebody say, like, I think I had a quote. I'm not going to try to pull it up because we're running out of time. Like, this is the game that finally proves it. It's like, dude, you haven't played Silent Hill. You haven't played Shadow of the Colossus. You haven't played, you know, some of these Final Fantasy games we talked about. You know, there's so freaking many. But that this is really at the core of what we're trying to do on the podcast. And that this is a perfect candidate. This game is a perfect candidate, whether you enjoy first-person shooters or not. I don't. It appears that it's not your favorite thing in the world either.
Not really. I've gotten some mileage out of them in the past, but I'm not that good at them.
Yeah.
Really, is the problem.
Yeah, and I don't love them, right?
Yeah.
Nevertheless, this is the type of game that I think people who appreciate games for the reasons we do must play. I think you cannot be a person who appreciates games as art and not have played Bioshock. So I extend this as an invitation to those of you who watch our content because you like JRPGs, for instance, to play this game with us. It's really that good. The core of what this game is exploring is that thought-provoking and interesting and just like in somewhat of a similar way, I guess, to how we've talked about having life-changing experiences with some of the movies and games that we talk about.
Okay, yeah.
This is on that level.
Okay.
And so I'm really, really looking forward to diving deeper into it. There's a lot of things that I researched and read in terms of interviews and quotes that I can't really talk about yet because I'm so worried about spoiling anything. But I will bring them up as we go on. So this was a little bit shorter of an episode as an opening or as a lead-in and a development history, but we will bring up some more points as we go through it, just for the fear of not trying to spoil anything.
Okay. I've got a few things right here at the very end. We've got this wonderful. This, as far as I can tell, other than the books that we've mentioned or the philosophers and writers and people that we've talked about. I feel where I'm going, just so everyone can get into my headspace with all of this. I've played the first hour, and so far we've got Atlantis, which is obvious, Noah's Ark, the Tower of Babel, just general hubris, Gnosticism, and the Greek Atlas, the Greek legend of Atlas. And that's just, first of all, some of those should be very familiar with things that we've talked about in the past. But it's all there. Like, we're going to get this kind of stuff. There's also the Garden of Eden, and like a ton of archetypal stories are kind of like being put together here. And I'm excited to see where it goes. I have not played this game. I have not beaten it, which means I'm not allowed to talk about games as art until I beat it. So I got to beat it now. No, I'm excited. This is going to be great. And hope
really looking forward to it. We hope you guys enjoy it. Join us again next week as we get into the opening chapters. We haven't been as good at this lately. I'm going to make sure this time that I give a breakdown to you so that of like what to play
up until when?
For the whole series. And hopefully when you upload it, you can put that into the pinned comment. Like, this is where to play up to, and you'll know each time because I've sent it to you ahead of time. Because he hasn't played it, so he doesn't know what to expect. So I'll try to get that to you real soon. And so look for that in the pinned comment. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. We appreciate you, and we will see you again next week. Peace out.